Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second webinar in a series being offered by the Science Communication Initiative at Rutgers University and co-sponsored by Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School's Department of Pathology, Immunology, and Laboratory Medicine, the School of Communication and Information, the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, and the Office of Research and Economic Development. So the Science Communication Initiative at Rutgers is a, sorry, hang on a moment. The Science Communication Initiative at Rutgers brings together under an umbrella term, science communication. The goal is to enhance the effectiveness, coordination, and visibility of Rutgers' efforts in education, research, and outreach, to advance the science of science communication, to train existing and emerging professionals in its practice, and to create a synergistic community of faculty, students, staff, and postgraduate trainees able to communicate about science with diverse public audiences, including policymakers. And we're very pleased today to bring together members of the Rutgers community to share work to advance science communication and to pursue potential research collaborations and training initiatives. And today's webinar brings graduate students' experiences and perspectives on science communication. Anna Dolinson from the Eagleton Institute of Politics will be our moderator, and I will let Anna introduce herself and the members of today's panel. Anna, stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and to the Science Communication Initiative for organizing workshops like these and inviting us. I'm Anna Dulencin. I'm a neuroscientist, and I coordinate the Eagleton Science and Politics Initiative at the Eagleton Institute of Politics. It is my great pleasure and honor to join you and moderate today's discussion on graduate perspectives and experiences on science communication. We're joined by two current graduate students, Hunter Lanovai and Jonathan Stoeber, and two recent graduates, Evvan Morton and Ian McLaughlin. Hunter and Jonathan are leaders of SPAR, Science Policy and Advocacy at Rutgers, which is a graduate student organization at Rutgers, focusing on empowering those in the sciences to understand how science affects policy and vice versa, and how to effectively advocate on behalf of science and research. Evvan and Ian are fellows at the Eagleton Science and Politics Fellowship Program, which places Ph.D. level scientists as science advisors into New Jersey state government full-time for a period of 1 year. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us. I'd also like to welcome everyone in the audience and encourage all of you to ask questions via the chat functions. After our discussion with the panelists, I'll be reading the questions out loud as they come. So now, going back to the panelists, can you please share a little bit about yourselves first?
Sure. My name is Evvan Morton. I am from Cincinnati, Ohio. I did my undergraduate degree in materials engineering at the University of Cincinnati, and I recently graduated in May with my PhD in sustainable engineering from Arizona State University. And I'm an Eagleton Science Fellow in the Senate Majority Office.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ian McLaughlin, and I wrapped up my PhD in neuroscience at the University of Pennsylvania at the end of last year. I focused on the neurobiology of addiction and anxiety. And like Evvan, and as Anna said, I'm placed in the Assembly Majority Office.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hunter Lanovai. Thank you, Anna, for moderating the discussion and the Science Communication Initiative for hosting us. So I got my undergraduate degree at Rollins College. If anyone's familiar with Mr. Rogers, he's a famous alumni. in biochemistry and molecular biology. Now I am a third-year PhD candidate in the Department of Pharmacology and Physiology at Rutgers-Newark, where I study how emotion develops and specifically how the environment might influence that.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I did my undergraduate degree at Ursinus College in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. I'm currently just started my 4th year in the chemistry department here at Rutgers, New Brunswick campus, where I study, I'm kind of an NMR spectroscopist studying the mechanisms of protein aggregation, specifically the protein in Parkinson's. And alongside Hunter, we co-run SPAR, used to be New Brunswick, Newark, me on the New Brunswick campus, Hunter on Newark, but we've kind of joined forces here running in kind of a conjoined organization now.
Thank you. So what we want to talk about today is to bring forth the graduate students' perspectives on science communication. And I want to begin by stepping back first. Can you describe what inspired you to work on your science communication skills?
I think for me, this kind of started from my interest in wanting to help communities using science. So my background is in engineering, and I really started getting interested in how to solve climate change. I kept hearing about it on the news, but nobody was saying much about what we're supposed to do. So that is kind of how my trajectory went into getting into my graduate research in climate change efforts. But through my interest in using engineering to help communities, I realized that science communication was really important if you're going to work with communities, especially those that may not have a science background. And I also kind of came into this through my interest in science policy. I realized that I wanted to be involved in policy when I did an internship at the National Renewable Energy Lab. I really got to start seeing how government was influencing research in the lab, and some of my frustrations of why, well, I was wondering why certain technologies, awesome technologies that were being developed in the lab were not like being deployed immediately. But there's a lot that steps you have to go through in the policy realm to see those things come true. So that really got me interested in that. Also showed me that science communication is very important in the policy realm when talking with people with policy and people in the government realm.
So my experience doing this kind of thing sort of came out of nowhere. I started using social media for science, like really on a whim. My girlfriend at the time, my wife now, and I were on a kind of date in a part of Philly called Penn's Landing, and I had heard about this new platform via Twitter that lets you live stream, and then people from all over the world can pop in and comment in real time. And I'd used it a couple times before, where I would see streams of like people in the Philippines or in Russia, like having dinner. You're just sort of sitting there, it's kind of surreal. And I use it a little bit for a short period of time on our date, but we got home and my wife was busy, and so I decided to just point the camera back at me for a little bit, and I just said that I study the brain, ask me anything, and within a few minutes, several hundred people were in there at the same time, and you know, there's a ton of spam and like insanity, right? It's the internet, but there are a bunch of like legit questions about Alzheimer's and addiction and like why we have dreams and what deja vu is, and I learned some pretty funny explanations for why so many people jumped in early on, but suffice it to say, it was like a very social media-y kind of reason. But anyways, I've kept it up ever since then. And, you know, so long as people are interested in chatting about neuroscience, and frankly, for me, being able to communicate with people outside of the discipline and in different countries and from different communities definitely helped me to remember why I love this field during like the really tough times that happen when everybody's working on their PhD. I'm sure Jonathan and Hunter can speak to that. But it also enabled me to work with some really amazing groups, like a company in West Virginia that made a platform that enables people to use VR, so like the Oculus Rift and other similar platforms, to explore microscopy data. So you can basically like walk through a field of neurons, or you know, manipulate a 3D MRI scan of a person's brain, or even your brain if you have the data. And you know, you can just like stare directly at your hippocampus, which is pretty cool. I wish I had it when I was studying anatomy. And maybe if we have time later on, I can show you what that is. But the moment I was probably most active was when I was a finalist in the Shorty Awards a few years ago, which is like sort of fashions itself after whatever, like media award ceremonies, but for online content. And I got to meet Bill Nye, and then people like Casey Neistat, if anybody knows him from YouTube. But I met one of the most gifted science communicators, in my opinion, Simone Yetch, the queen of crappy robots. Slightly different name than that, but she's awesome. You should check her out. And then I had a podcast, or I have a podcast that I've neglected for a while, and it got some pretty, substantive traction. And so, towards the end of my PhD, I had to reduce the frequency of doing all that. But it was really this kind of incidental, by accident, experience of using social media for science. And I think that there are a lot of opportunities there to take advantage of. So that was my experience.
Thanks, Ian. I might have to steal that VR tech from you. Finish my graduate degree quick. So my interest in science communication was a little bit more gradual, I would say. And I think I have a lot to thank my undergraduate institution for. It was a small liberal arts school, and science communication was, unknowing to me at the time, incorporated deeply into the curriculum. We had to practice written and oral science communication skills on the daily. So I kind of honed all of those skills in before even attending graduate school. And on top of that, because of the nature of the degree, you have to take things that aren't science, outside of your interests, or my interests at the time in molecular biology. So I ended up trying to minor in philosophy, which I wasn't able to finish, but I was able to read Plato's Republic, and I became very interested in, how do we build this society, and what types of things inform how we try to make this whole system ethical. So I think I kind of channeled that first into SPAR in a very diffuse way, not knowing exactly how I could engage my science, in the lab with the community, or how it would even apply. And I think now I'm in a great place where I'm looking for as many outlets as I can to communicate my science and make my expertise available. I found actually during the beginning of the pandemic, the Federation of American Scientists had set up a chatbot. And I was one among others, I know some attendees today, that were answering questions from the public, from a very concerned public, about the scientific nature of this virus. So I think going forward, and with SPAR now being a newly appointed co-president, I'm finding that this type of message of science communication, and the idea that as a graduate student you can do more than just do work in the lab and apply for a grant. I think that we've been pretty successful in inspiring people on the Newark, New Brunswick, and possibly also Camden campuses to start interfacing, getting involved with their community.
As my transition to science communication is I was similar to Hunter's. I also started gradually after joining SPAR, I would say. It was actually, I would say, 2 years ago, I went on a case trip, which some of you may or may have not heard of. It's sponsored by AAAS, which is the largest, I believe it's the largest and oldest nonprofit backing science interests in America. And they sponsor a yearly trip for graduate students to kind of come down to DC, attend a workshop, and then spend the final day advocating for federally funded NSF and NIH research to your local and state level, or your federally recognized local Congress and senators. So that was a big eye-opening experience. We had about 6 meetings during that day with different members, and I can tell you that they got better as time went on. The first one was definitely much worse than the last one. You kind of learn very quickly that people in politics and in Washington area do not speak nearly as similar the way that we speak to each other as scientists. So that was definitely an eye opener for me, and something that, as you know, Hunter said, we kind of just took the mantle of co-presidents here. Something that I've realized is something I should work on as well, not just the policy side, but also how to talk to people outside of the science realm.
Now, reflecting on your undergraduate and graduate opportunities, and Hunter, this is something you've touched upon in your response, what kind of experience did you have trying to gain science communication training? Was that embedded in your training? Did you have to go somewhere else? How did you go with your advisor or the department?
During my undergraduate degree, I wasn't quite there yet. I don't think I really was looking for all of that much. I was going toward the path of, I thought that I would work at Procter and Gamble or something. I was just going to do straight engineering and climb up the corporate engineering ladder, I guess. But then I started really getting interested in science policy. So in graduate schools, when I really started seeking training, I did my PhD at Arizona State University, and that university is very interdisciplinary, which is one of the reasons I chose to go there. They do a really great job of allowing different disciplines to work together, which I think is somewhat odd for the STEM fields. I think there are a lot of professors that are in departments that are very strict on, if you're doing this type of science, we only work with these types of scientists, and you will do this research, and that's how you will graduate. But in my university, it was really great to be able to work with people in policy and different types of get different types of perspectives for my dissertation research than I would have been able to just working with the engineers and other scientists. And so I really had to, I had a great university to get a lot of different resources. That is really where I first learned about science policy fellowships. And there were a few small kind of more like just meetings to learn about these different fellowships, not really much training. So I did have to kind of go outside of the university for more training. I started attending different science conferences like AAAS and the American Geophysical Union. That both of those conferences have great sessions on science communication and on science policy, and have great panels to learn from a lot of different people. So as I started learning more about what I wanted to do, then I got more connected with the different types of conferences I should go to and people to talk to that way.
So I also went to a small liberal arts college consortium of colleges called the Claremont Colleges. And when I started college, I had no inkling of an idea that I would go into science. I'd never met a scientist. I didn't really know what being a scientist is like. But I ended up on a whim. I was studying politics, unsurprisingly, I suppose. And I took a science course, a brain and behavior course on a whim, and it was taught by this guy who evidently was initially going to do a PhD in literature. And he did his PhD in neuroscience, and it turned out to be just this fantastic communicator. And it sort of illustrated to me that our relationships with science, as people outside of the field, I think are dramatically sculpted by those initial kind of exposures. And if you're just memorizing the Krebs cycle and then, just trying to get a good grade, that's just not what being in science is even close to being like. I never really had any kind of formal science communication training. And in my experience, it's like, we've done them at the Society for Neuroscience conference. And in my experience, it's a little bit hit or miss. Sometimes it's, just don't use jargon and, that's pretty much it. But sometimes they're really, really fabulous. And I think the best ones that I've attended so far emphasize storytelling and making a direct emotional connection. It doesn't really matter if the audience, learns all of the anatomical, lingo or anything like that. That's not, shouldn't even be, or at least it's not even my goal. It's more just bringing them closer to the field rather than being this sort of an insulated kind of concept. And so, yeah, that's been the sort of like the gist of my experiences in science, in training for science communication.
Thanks, Ian. I think, as I stated previously, my training in undergraduate was quite comprehensive and incorporated. And I think I can give you one anecdote, which was we had a course where we did a semester-long lab project, molecular biology project. We used CRISPR-Cas9, which at the time was really, really cool to be using in an undergraduate lab. We had to present a poster on the project we did. And the professor for the course, he played 3 roles when he came around to our groups, and we didn't know who he was going to be. He was either going to be an expert, he was going to be someone maybe outside of your field, but in science, or a layman. And we had to, on the fly, improvise and try to communicate the high points or the gist of our project to each of those. So I felt like introductions to those types of exercises in that way allowed me to grasp, I guess, in the beginning, how improvisational science communication is. And I think I've followed this forward into graduate school. I think the training for science communication is not what it could be. I think that at Rutgers, there are plentiful opportunities, and I think that there are a ton of resources. I think the key is that you have to be motivated to seek them out. And maybe we can talk about that later in terms of whether or not I think that's a good thing. But I think that I've been able to cultivate my science communication skills. I've also joined particular professional networks like the National Science Policy Network, which has opened me up to the world of science policy, and which I'm extremely grateful for that opportunity, and the previous president of our group introducing me to the network that he interacted with and built. We also have collaborations with Princeton and other schools in the Rutgers Biomedical and Health Sciences group. And I think that the way I approach it is all of these particular collaborations and communications with different people at different levels, they are all opportunities to hone science communication skills and also hone the initiative for increasing science communication. So I think that's where I come from in terms of training at the undergraduate and graduate level.
So I also went to a small liberal arts school, and that played, I have to agree with these two here, that played a big role in my development as well. You know, I was also fortunate enough to play football at this school and to be, you know, surrounded by every day by, you know, 100 other guys who had drastically, you know, different majors, interests, you know, all of that. So just engaging in, you know, different conversations on a daily basis was always intriguing to me. But I remember one thing that our college did was a kind of, I guess, an open seminar day across the entire campus. It was like the last day of April every year where they shut the school down. All classes were canceled, and anyone doing research for the semester or a year or previous summer would present a poster presentation or like a video presentation. So kind of every building across campus was just filled with posters of all the students that were presenting their work that they had done. So it was always cool on that day to just walk around. You know, I would always present that day as well, but to walk around and chat with people from every department across you could imagine, and just, you know, pick their brain and just see what like really excites them about their work, what they hated about it, and just generally get to see a different perspective than, you know, my undergrad research was with like sitting in a dark room in front of a potentiometer every day that had to be completely quiet. No noise or light was allowed in the room. So this was like, you know, 5 hours a day, 4 days a week I was doing that. So it was kind of refreshing to get out and see another perspective on research, not just, you know, the chemistry perspective, but not sitting in a lonely dark room all day. So that was always cool. And I think I like to think that was kind of the beginning of when I just became more curious about research, and, you know, kind of opened me up to the perspective of pursuing a research degree, because I will say before kind of that, I wasn't, you know, too keen on it. And so, you know, it was nice to see all the perspective, fresh faces, and the enthusiasm for their research.
Thank you all. So following up on Ian's earlier comment, Ian, you mentioned that you met someone who you thought was the best science communicator among a number of other people who were very, very good communicators, right? So my question to all of you is, what do you think makes a really good science communicator, and what kind of training, right, do you think is needed?
I think what makes a really great science communicator is someone that really makes you excited about the science that they're talking about, or makes you feel empowered to do something about a certain scientific problem. Just being able to make it relatable to your life, and that you can actually, you know, say, hey, I think I can do something about that, or I think I can learn more about that, and so that I can create new solutions in the future. So I think, I guess for training for that, yeah, just having courses on how to relate things to your audience, and but also in the same way with writing, in the same way, it's something that can grab your attention and get you really fired up about a cause, and that you can either use your scientific expertise to help with, or if science is not in your background, but being able to use whatever resources you have to help in the cause for that scientific issue.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. I think the best people I've encountered, at least in my perspective, I see this through like the lens of social media, right? And people are interested in other people. Like on social media, like people don't follow ideas. I mean, maybe they think they are, but even somebody who follows like an IFL science type thing, you know, that it's sort of a brand that they're following and associating with. But broadly speaking, when it comes to science communicators, like I think we have this instinct as scientists to focus entirely on the data and the findings, like that they should be enough to tell the story. But I think the best people involve this sort of human component of doing science, of the failures, of, you know, the triumphs, and then, you know, just the difficult component or experiences that one has while engaging in research, like sitting in a room for 5 hours in the dark for that long. Like that's a real thing that people can totally be like, wow, you must really want to get this done. You know, like Simone Yetch is the person I brought up, and she is an engineer, but, you know, gets into really kind of creative devices and stuff like that. But she also shares her personality and, you know, her life experiences that you know, sort of are ongoing while she's presenting the science. I try and do very similar things. I'm not nearly like the engineer that she is, but I think that element, the human element, as aversive as we may be to doing so, including it, I think it makes for just that slightly better, more sort of effective communication.
Thank you, Evan and Ian. I just want to actually piggyback off that. I think that the empathetic element is extremely important in an effective science communicator. I think also another critical component that's maybe overlooked sometimes is listening and engaging with your audience in a way that makes you very relatable. So I think, again, piggybacking off of all of what you said, I think improvisation and creativity is also very important when it comes to communicating science. Oftentimes, you know, we may get fixated on a particular point or a particular set of data, but ultimately, I think we have to slow down and ask ourselves what the most important message we're trying to convey to our particular audience is, and then within that framework, be the creative scientists that we all are, and find a way to do that. I think as far as training is concerned, and And this is something I have seen in my undergraduate studies. I think that the most effective skills are learned when you're in a safe environment and you have the ability to stumble and make mistakes and learn on your feet. And I think that oftentimes in graduate school, well, most of the time you're held accountable for what you say to a T, right? And it isn't always the most safe environment sometimes. So I think this is actually something that Dr. Nucci and Dr. Nick Ponzio have gotten or tried to incorporate into their communicating science course, where they allow the space in order to stumble into being a better science communicator. So I think that is a crucial component, and from there you can build out the tailoring of your rhetoric to your audience, the empathizing factor, and of course, just putting things in the simplest terms you can.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything the three of these just said regarding what makes a good science communicator. You know, it is passion. It is, you know, generating interest, generating a buzz, making people want to listen to you. So I'm not going to, you know, reiterate everything they said, but to talk a little bit about the training portion, I guess, you know, what I try to do is just talk to, you know, as much people as I can about my work or anything, you know, going on in the world that people might not know about that, you know, I'm passionate about, and just talking to them in any way I can, you know, whether it be, you know, friends, family, or just someone I see, you know, don't see too many strangers these days with COVID that I'm talking to, but you know, just random family members. I'll call my mom. We'll have a conversation. Just talk as much as you can about it, just to get that training in.
Now, it's not very common that science graduate programs have science communication training made part of the program, right? Or maybe, Ian, if you disagree, you can talk about that.
No, I was just thinking that it's pretty remarkable that there is this course that they're talking about. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we're very lucky at Rutgers, right? So now, reflecting on all the things that you've mentioned, right? What kind of training is needed to really make nice, to make effective science communicators, right? And if you had the opportunity to change graduate programs, perhaps even the requirements, right? What kind of training would you incorporate? Whether it's writing, public speaking, improvisation, right? Or do you think science communication training should be elective?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure if it should be. Well, if I had to choose, I would make it required. There would be probably people that it's been interesting learning the different types of scientists. I think there's a better word for this, but I can't think of it right now. But like, there are some scientists that only want to do research on things that might not have a direct effect on society. And so they might think that I just want to do my small thing that I think is really cool, but I don't really want to talk to people about it, and I don't really need to, because it's not necessarily going to affect people. And for me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I think what we do does affect society, and it's important to share it. So yeah, I would say it should be required that you have public speaking classes, which I did have public speaking classes in my undergrad, but it wasn't science related. It was just public speaking in general. But I think having public speaking for scientists, and I think one thing that I've learned, even just doing poster presentations with other scientists and engineers, we don't even, if you're talking to another scientist in a different scientific field as you, we aren't even taught that type of just science communication to simply talk about your research to another scientist. All of the people on this panel, I like molecular biology and neuroscience, I don't do that. So if you use your jargon to me, I still am not going to understand it. So even amongst ourselves, I think we need to do better at how we learn how to speak to each other about our work. So that type of science communication, as well as to the public, and also writing as well, which I think is important to another way to get your science to a broader audience that may not be in your same local area, but being able to write and publish things in a simpler fashion that a broader audience can read, I think is a very important skill.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, I think part of the difficulty is that there's probably no one size fits all. Like, if you take this class, you're going to be great at all kinds of communication. Like, I remember we did this a sort of science communication workshop thing, and people came who weren't really interested in speaking about their science at all. They were artists, or they liked making videos, and those are pretty different skills. And one of the best science communicators I've seen, who's the most creative, is an artist named Dunn, who got his PhD where I did mine in neuroscience. And I highly recommend you check out his art. I mean, it's not just pictures of neurons. Like, he does an excellent job of conveying the complexity and the connectivity of the brain and everything. And so, that's part of the difficulty. I think another challenge is that there really aren't kind of formal or predictable career trajectories if one wants to pursue science communication that are kind of, laid out when you're in graduate school, like other, career trajectories are. And so something I would love to see is more like publicly funded, federal support for, small scale, community scale science communication efforts, so that it's tough to kind of replace actual experience doing it and learning from your own, stubbing your own toes, doing it's difficult to sort of read the book and then know how to do it. But it's difficult, I think, for a lot of programs to be able to devise those kinds of opportunities, particularly on the fly. Whereas, if you had like, oh, you love or you want to explore public speaking, but we have this, weekly thing where we go to this local organization and we give talks for free for anybody who wants to come. I would love to see that being more widely available, and I would imagine that more people would gravitate towards those experiences. So kudos to Rutgers for having something like a class devoted to it.
I think both of those points are extremely important. I think maybe incorporating them both together into an outlook on how to train effective science communicators in graduate school. I think absolutely it's important to have this incorporated into the curriculum. I don't think it should be elective. I think personally, and from an ethical point of view, that if you choose to pursue this career goal, you have a responsibility to society. The same way a physician has a responsibility to, taking care of their patients or upholding the Hippocratic Oath. I think that based on my experience, a lot of people in my graduate program came in with diverse background in science communication. Some came from a background like me and many of us on this panel, from a liberal arts school where they were taught all these written and oral communication skills quite beautifully. And other people came from engineering backgrounds where maybe this wasn't the emphasis. So I think first there should be a baseline in which graduate students are given introductory or maybe more so improvisational courses where they have to communicate science orally and written. I then think it would be interesting to consider having as maybe, so for those that apply for a grant from the NSF, there's the broader impact section in which you have to somehow apply the science you're doing in the lab to society. I think it would be interesting to require graduate students to somehow, whether it be through art, whether it be through oral or written communication, somehow make the information that they discovered on the frontiers of knowledge accessible to the public. I think that I think it's critical, especially considering the fact that we're a globalized society and scientific issues are increasingly of concern. Great example is the pandemic, climate change, and what we do with particular technologies we develop as well. So I think it's critical that we teach these things in graduate school.
Hunter, those are very good points. Jonathan, before you go, I just wanted to make a few points. I really liked your example of medical students having to sort of explore bedside manner as a way of communicating medicine, right? Which ties to Evvan's point about the fact that every scientist, whether in graduate school or later, even if they choose to focus solely on science and stay in the lab, will at some point have to present that those findings to either fellow scientists within or outside of the discipline. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I also agree that I do think that each individual department should take it upon themselves to add a science communication portion to the program, whether it be through like an elective required class. But it does benefit them to have some sort of science communication training. It affects us every day, when we talk to a potential collaborator, someone down the hall. It affects us when we're presenting at, a webinar presentation or hopefully sometime soon a poster presentation in person. So it definitely is beneficial to, the university and science community as a whole to prepare students for this. But I also think the Science Communication Initiative is already in place, and it's, I forget how old it is, but I remember Mary and Nick saying it's not, that old. So I think Rutgers, continuing to support and, maybe providing with more funding to facilitate, maybe you don't make each department doesn't have specific elective students have to take, but maybe the Science Communication Initiative is larger to a degree where they are able to run more events that students are just generally interested and want to do this. But again, it does, I think, making it mandatory degree would help. I think it's something that will get students more interested in early on and, provide them with the benefits earlier on in their career. It's definitely something, thinking I probably would have benefited and been, very happy to take first or second semester, right in the beginning of graduate school. That definitely would have benefited me from there on.
Thank you all for your great suggestions. So despite all of this, many graduate programs, as I mentioned, do not have these opportunities. And a lot of students have to take this do-it-yourself approach, right? Do you have any recommendations on where they can go to get more training? Have you pursued training outside of your school? How did you learn about it? Which ones would you recommend?
I think most of my training has come from during my PhD. I was a part of the Arizona Science Policy Network, which is basically the equivalent to SPAR, but for Arizona. And that's really where I actually learned that there was training for these things. I was just really, I knew I wanted to go into science policy. And then I started learning like, oh, you can write op-eds and letters to the editor and, speak to kids about science and speak to everybody about science. And I didn't really know about the more, I guess, formalized ways to do this. And so that I would recommend that you all join SPAR, because I'm sure they're doing great things in that area. Or, also check out the National Science Policy Network that Hunter talked about as well, which is kind of like the overarching group for all of these smaller state science policy networks, because that's really where I started getting more resources on how to write better and how to speak. We also hosted an Arizona Science Day at the Capitol, which is becoming an annual event in Arizona where scientists, mostly from Arizona State, but we were working on trying to get it much more spread out to anybody in Arizona and the other universities there. But coming to the Arizona Capitol, and this past year we had just tables around and with different handouts. So another skill, learning how to write one-pagers and learning how to have easy, graphics for people to understand. And it was just an opportunity for the state legislators to come in and speak to us and come to our tables with the different subjects. So that was a great opportunity to practice speaking to people about science. So that's probably my main recommendation. There's also the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS. They have some great resources, as well as the American Geophysical Union. And pretty much, I feel like it's getting a lot more popular in the scientific organizations, that they all have some kind of either science communication or science policy or government affairs type of department that has really started creating more resources for these types of trainings.
Okay, so, well, obviously you should all join SPAR. That's the first thing you should do. I was in a similar position for my graduate school's equivalent, the Penn Science Policy and Diplomacy Group, and we hosted similar things. And like, one thing that was surprising for me, and maybe this isn't applicable to everybody, was like, if you just ask people, even if you think like there's no way this person would want to come, they'll more often than not say yes. Like sometimes they cost a lot of money and you just can't afford it. But yeah, just sort of like be ambitious, when you're in these groups. So there's that. There's also, like, depending on the kind of science communication or medium, really, the kind of medium that you feel like wouldn't feel like work, because at a certain point, like social media, for example, can begin to be kind of like a churn, kind of like, less of a hobby. But if you're doing something that you enjoy, whether it's writing, speaking, doing art, making art, whatever, that can help. And like the best thing you could do is find some people who are doing the kind of thing that inspire you, that you find to be substantive, and just sort of ape them for a little while. Just sort of, think of what you would do if you were making their kind of content. Obviously don't post it, but learn from the people who you think are the masters. I have like a list of science communicators that I've used in the past, and I guess it's not probably worth showing right now, but I really enjoy video-based and live stream science communication. That's sort of what I'm into. And so, like Smarter Every Day is excellent. Simone Yatch is great. Mark Rober, I think, is great. There's a bunch. Well, in any case, that's sort of what I did. And then, there are some PIs who use Twitter, I think, very effectively and have a pretty broad audience that extends beyond just the scientific community. So that's been the most sort of edifying thing that I've done so far. And a lot of the sort of workshops haven't been as instructive as watching what it is that these people whom I look up to are doing. So that would be my advice.
Thank you both. Join SPAR. Look into the NSPN. I think to both of your points, it's when you're looking for this type of training, it's great to look for like-minded individuals. That's where all the opportunities will be, and that's where you might find things that you didn't know even existed. I know I'm in the beginning of my science policy, science communication training, but through SPAR and our particular collaborators, I know I've attended a ton of really enlightening workshops and events at the Eagleton Institute. We've been in close contact with the Science Communication Initiative, and they're really doing great things. And our group, we're trying to make our own training opportunities as well. I have a passion for science communication and engaging with students on the primary education level. And recently we held a science day, a virtual science day in June with an elementary school in Montclair, New Jersey. And that was really rewarding. So I think, yeah, if I'm to leave you with one thing, it would be to look for like-minded individuals for opportunities.
Yeah, so definitely join SPAR. We, as everyone said, we're hoping to do some great things here. With events, policy memo write-ups, any op-ed writing. But if science policy truly is not your interest, I recommend joining any other GSA or graduate student organization that is within your department or a kind of non-departmental group. Before this, I was also on the board of the chemistry GSO. And, you know, that was an interesting position, more setting up events within the chemistry department. But, you know, I was also a part of the board in the transition during COVID. So during that process, I was able to set up a small journal club, a biweekly journal club that was typically attended by 15 to 20 students, where, you know, every other week we did a journal review and someone came and presented a 20, 30-minute presentation based on a paper they picked, and then we had a quick Q&A afterwards. And that was just kind of really nice to, you know, stay engaged, not only, you know, hear about this research, but also stay engaged with graduate students, other graduate students and your friends throughout the pandemic. So, you know, being a part of SPAR, the board of SPAR and the chemistry GSO has also just put me in a position to, you know, meet other graduate students I might not have met, you know, probably would have never met Hunter, you know, being that he's at Rutgers-Newark if I was not a part of SPAR, and also, you know, other professors and other just random events too. I found myself at a lot of Eagleton events that I would probably not have heard about if I was not a part of SPAR or have been interested to attend. So it's just great to get yourself out there to meet people and to, you know, get to events that you probably would not be interested in otherwise.
Thank you for the plug-in for Eagleton events. Now, I'd like to ask all of you about how you use your science communication in your outreach to different communities and different generations, right? So for example, Evvan, I know that you're a founder of a nonprofit, Biogals, right? And you have a Twitter following and you know, 3,000 people tune in to your weekly talk on Twitter, right? Hunter, you've worked with elementary school students. Jonathan, I understand you've worked with Boys and Girls Club, right? Any lessons learned how we can approach different generations and different communities?
I just realized I forgot to mention one other resource for training that I just wanted to plug. I recently finished a workshop called Reclaiming STEM, which is focused on marginalized groups in the STEM fields. So women and people of color and people with disabilities, LGBTQ community. And so that was also a really great opportunity to use that type of your identity into incorporating your identity into how you communicate science. So that's just another resource. But also, I am the co-founder and vice president of Biogals. It's a nonprofit organization focused on increasing women of color in the STEM fields and retaining them. And a part of this nonprofit came out of research that I did with my friend and colleague, Dr. Shakira Hobbs. We were doing anaerobic digestion research in Belize, the process of converting food waste into biogas for cooking. And through that, we realized that we could have a big impact on the women and girls in the community, because we were finding that it was very unusual for two Black women to be leading a technical project in their community. And so we thought this could be a really great opportunity to kind of break the stereotypes of what women and women of color can do, and also encourage other women of color to experience it and join the STEM field in their studies or possibly in their future careers. So through all of that, science communication has become very important because just as in any community that you might go into, not everybody is a scientist. So you need to, especially if you're wanting to bring in a technology that you think would be helpful, which this is a very, this type of engineering aspect, engineering in society aspect, I think is really also really important in the education of scientists and engineers. We think we know what's best for a community because we know the science, but if you haven't been engaged in the community, you haven't done surveys, you haven't actually talked to the people, then you don't really know that. So our process of working in a community called City River in Belize learning the skills of surveys and talking with people and communicating about anaerobic digestion in a simpler way that they could understand how it would affect their community and possibly give them a more sustainable way of using a cooking fuel. That experience was really helpful in learning how to communicate science in a better way so that they could also be engaged in the research that we were doing.
Okay, so really quick, you know, there are some communities online. Again, I'm mostly, you know, I'm extremely online via Twitter. There are communities like hashtag unique scientists, or also underscore a scientist is like the handle, where they specifically promote, you know, engagement with underserved communities, you know, particularly underrepresented within the scientific community. It's worth reaching out. They're very, very inclusive. And there's also something called ComSciCon, so like ComSci Convention, which is devoted to science communication. And it's sort of run by a lot of the same people who are associated with the Unique Scientist organization. So the other thing for me, like one of the main things that a lot of communities have, particularly those who don't have, you know, the privilege of being exposed to a lot of science, you know, through their education and afterwards, that there's this misconception that you have to be like a genius to be into science or to be a scientist. And so they presume a few things, and this manifests in a few ways, you know, and oftentimes it's in like attempts that they're making to be very kind and complimentary by saying like, you're so brilliant and you must be such a genius for doing this. But there's a lot of problems that emerge from that because they think they can't possibly understand science, which, you know, take it from me, you do not have to be a genius to get into science. But I think more perniciously, I think it sets up this kind of adversarial posture for some people because they will assume that we all think they're stupid. I've encountered this all the time. I've heard people like apologize for not knowing anything before even beginning to speak. And so there's this pre-established relationship in their minds when they assume that you think that they're ignorant or stupid. And so it's been, in my experience, really worth it to pretty regularly acknowledge that there's no reason to assume that I'm any smarter than anybody else, however we're even defining smart, of course. And that just because someone's in science doesn't mean that they're like Albert Einstein or something, right? Being a scientist is like a normal vocation, just like anything else. And you know, it's like my job to know a lot about the brain, right? But if you get me talking about anything other than the brain or politics or sci-fi, I'm like totally useless. So that's like one barrier that is quite I quite commonly encounter in a variety of communities. And I could go on, but another thing is that you know, I have the luxury of having access to communities all over the world. Right. And something that I've learned is that when it comes to biomedical science and, you know, very, very similar topics seem to be in the minds of people outside of the discipline, regardless of nationality or culture. Like there was this time when, like, during essentially every live chat I would do, someone would bring up the topic of deja vu. But it would be somebody in Indonesia, and then in the UAE, and then in London, and then in Texas. And then the same went for, they seem to come in waves of interest, which is kind of interesting, but the same went for cannabis, for dreams, dementia, and TBI. It's like, did not matter where the person was coming from. They were interested in the same things. And I don't know if biomedical science may be somewhat unique in this respect, but it seems like these curiosities just tend to emerge from like a very personal and very emotional place for a lot of people. And the insights from biomedical science, not as a physician, right? Just the discoveries, just the knowledge, I think are a great way to connect people to science in a way that opens up curiosities for other disciplines, other scientific disciplines, and also kind of helps to sort of break down that barrier of like, I have nothing to do with this, you know, and these people think I'm an idiot anyways. When you're talking about somebody's relative who has Alzheimer's disease, that doesn't matter so much anymore. Now they're interested in understanding, you know, why their grandmother no longer remembers their name. So yeah, those two kind of main things were, I think, enable access to a lot of communities that would otherwise be kind of difficult to reach.
No, thank you. Those are great points. I think, you know, breaking down that barrier is absolutely essential. And it's something that our group is very, very concerned with. That's why we develop particular task forces to look into ways in which, first of all, we can look towards a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive Rutgers. And we've put people together to brainstorm and figure out the ways in which we can help faculty initiatives at that level, as well as engage with diverse communities. I think another important aspect to realize, especially in Newark, is that a lot of the work at, or a lot of the workers at our hospital, as well as our medical science building, are from surrounding communities which are underserved. And I think it's crucially important that we look towards giving back. And I think one very crucial and really not labor-intensive way is to interface and engage and make ourselves and our knowledge accessible to spark interest, and to specifically spark interest in people that otherwise wouldn't have that interest sparked. So I think the most critical thing to that is breaking down the barrier of being in an ivory tower, because that's how it seems. You know, unless you make yourself approachable, unless you have a dialogue, instead of talking at people. So I think this is one thing we're looking towards. We have a task force for science communication just for that. And I think, though, that it's a chicken or egg scenario where we need graduate students that are interested in communicating their science to have some sort of initiative as this. So while we are looking towards engaging with the community, we're also looking towards advocating for increasing science communication with the faculty. So this is something that the science communication has already been doing, but as graduate students, we feel that our voice is important to be heard, and we feel that we do bring a unique perspective to how we can incorporate this sort of education to inspire more scientists to be like-minded in terms of engaging with the community, which we should do.
Yeah, so as Anna had said, I worked at the Boys and Girls Club. This was high school and college, my summers. So, you know, in this role, I was, you know, interacting with, you know, hundreds of kids every day. And I will say, you know, in terms of communicating science, although I wasn't doing that on a daily basis with them at the time, you know, kids are definitely the easiest to talk to. I will say that. You know, the kind of passion and intensity that you need when you're talking to people goes double when you're talking to kids. They are much easier to grab their attention and don't so much care as what you're talking about, as long as you are passionate about it. They're, you know, very curious, very impressionable. So if you can get them to listen and just show how passionate you are about what you're talking about, they will soak it up. So, you know, just breaking it down to the most basics of your research, and just, you know, shoving all that enthusiasm in their face, and they will kind of soak it all in.
Thank you, Jonathan and Evan and Hunter and Ian. Thank you all very much for your thoughtful responses and for your beautifully weaved comments in science communication in both graduate education, outside opportunities, what made difference for you, and what needs to be done going forward. Now, I want to keep the momentum going, so I'm going to move into Q&A and read questions as they've come. Our panelists, I encourage you to answer questions as to sort of go ahead and answer whenever you'd like. So our first question was from, let me find it, Abby Reed. She says, today in my science communication class with Dr. Nucci, we were debating whether politics and science should be intertwined. There are pros and cons to each side. Do any of you have a particular opinion? And I just want to point out that just a few days ago, for the first time, a scientific journal endorsed a presidential candidate, right? So what's your opinion on that? And to answer Abby's question, and I realized that wasn't her first, so I'll go back to her first question right after this.
I guess I'll just say that whether, I guess, we like it or not, politics and science are in some regard intertwined. And I think that, in my opinion, it's taken too long for, I think I know the 3 scientific journals you're talking about, to write this particular endorsement. I think that it's important to, especially when lives are on the line, to support and advocate for evidence that has been scientifically proven. But I think that also there is I think maybe the critical part of this question is that there is a very different public trust in politicians versus scientists. And I could see how perhaps connecting the two in the public eye would perhaps erode maybe some trust in scientists. But I don't think that this has to be the case. I think that again, it's just important that scientists are not afraid to resolutely state that these particular findings or a particular important point, right, doesn't have to be, as we were discussing later, straight from the data or hammering away at a particular scientific point, but a particular message that's important for the society should be conveyed, and it should be in collaboration with politicians.
Yeah, I mean, I happen to share the political perspective that I think it was a New England Journal of Medicine and Scientific American put out there. I honestly don't think it'll have a particularly significant effect electorally. I think it does kind of put a flag down for the history that'll be written about this political era, though. And it's pretty symbolic about how and why science has become so politicized. I don't think it's come from the discipline, frankly. And I totally understand why the editors made the decision that they did, maybe felt obligated to do so. Personally, I haven't been overly partisan in my communications, just because something like half of my audience have political ideologies that are like absolutely diametrically opposed to my own. And in fact, some of them have been some of the most generous supporters. It's like we just got a toy sent from one of them in Texas from this lovely grandmother who, supports a candidate that I definitely do not. And so, I think it's valuable to have these opportunities to connect in these ways via medium that isn't overtly partisan, because, social media has become almost entirely balkanized. And, so I would love to go off on various things from like a totally partisan perspective. It would be like cathartic. But I think there's some value in avoiding doing so in some cases, not across the board, but in some cases, if there is some cross-partisan communication, because there's so few opportunities for that. Frankly, I don't think that Scientific American or NEJM are going to be losing any kind of noticeable, losing any significant readership, and the cynic in me actually, sees it as a kind of like a savvy kind of move. But, I don't think that these outlets were venues for cross-partisan communication anyways. So I don't have a problem with it. And I just think that where there are opportunities to sustain that kind of communication, I think it's worth it. I think it's worth trying to do so. Yeah.
And for all who are interested in the intersection of science and politics, I encourage you to get involved with the Eagleton Science and Politics Initiative, because that's what we do. And we're going to be hosting a workshop on November 13th. It's going to be Friday from 10 to 12. We'll be promoting soon, so you should see the materials soon around Rutgers. But we'll be talking about the politics of lead and water. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that is an interesting point, because we, as I'm sure Ian and Evan have to take this into account when they're at their day-to-day job here. It's something that me and Hunter have to take into account as well when we're thinking of events. Being that we are a science policy-based group, we are expected to stay apolitical, and it's I don't always necessarily agree with it, especially when we're talking about politicians who might be supporting stuff that is so just vehemently against what we kind of fundamentally believe in. But I think if you are going to go out and step into the partisan behavior, I think you should keep it strictly to the science and keeping it as by the data as possible. And I think I didn't read completely the letter that was it New England Medical Journal wrote, but from what I did read, it did seem that they were keeping it to not taking cheap shots, but keeping it as by the book. We fundamentally don't agree with these things, and I think that is the best way to go about it if you are going to go into the realm of politics.
I also just say quickly, I agree. I haven't read it, so I should. I'm interested. I think I've heard about this, but I haven't read the letter. But yeah, I think there is value in being nonpartisan as scientists because we're not supposed, I don't think we're supposed to be in the way that we do our science. But the fact that they felt the need to write that letter, I think I haven't read it, but I'm assuming it's because they were concerned about the safety of Americans. And I think it is a part of our job to, like Hunter had mentioned before, kind of like how doctors have have made a commitment to do their job well to help people. I think as scientists, we do as well. And so if there's something that they felt that would put Americans in danger, and they felt that they could speak up in that way to help people, I think that is important. But again, sticking strictly to the science of why that was necessary, I think is still important so that we can do better at keeping science nonpartisan.
Thank you. Our next question is from Brian Cantor. He's asking, can you describe an experience when a more established researcher, faculty member, dean, etc., supported your science communication interests?
So I can speak on my experience with my advisor. Thankfully, my advisor has been supportive of my efforts. I've found that just open and honest communication has helped that. She made it very clear when I kind of told her that I wanted to pursue that research is still extremely important, and barring a lack of progress in research, we would have a conversation about it. But that has not happened yet. So as long as I keep up to my end, she continues to support. So yeah, again, open and honest communication has been the best way for me to go about it.
My PI was I was very fortunate. She was very supportive. We were definitely on the same page when it came to getting my work done and everything. But Penn is very fortunate to have a department devoted to diversity in training. And the dean of that department is Dr. Arnaldo Diaz, and he's fantastic. And like I don't know if maybe there's any other person who has brought as many people from communities that are underrepresented within STEM and certainly within biomedical science than he has. And so I think I don't know, maybe that's more common than the sense I've gathered, that somebody like that would be at a dean level in a department of graduate studies. But if not, then I think that he's a wonderful model. Like what he has going is a wonderful model of supporting communications and supporting outreach and stuff like that. So Arnaldo Diaz is a great example. He's very active on Twitter too, of course, by the way.
I think I've had a similar experience in terms of my mentor. She's supportive of my scientific and my science policy endeavors. She's actually sent out to her friends and other institutions a voter registration effort that I at SPAR had put together in collaboration with another group. So on that front, it's fantastic to have your mentor supporting your science communication. I think maybe in contrast, we've had on the Newark campus a little bit of difficulties with our administration in terms of science communication and increasing diversity, equity, and inclusion. But this is something that thankfully our group, me and John, are collaborating with Mary Nucci and Nick Ponzio with the Science Communication Initiative. So this is something that we hope we can advocate for. and see some change.
Similar to everyone else, my PI was very supportive, mostly with the fact that I wanted to incorporate science policy into my dissertation, which my PhD journey was a lot of things, but I changed advisors twice. So this was my third advisor that that I had, and I was focusing on carbon dioxide removal, technologies that can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to mitigate climate change. And my advisor is a pretty big deal in the field. His name is Dr. Klaus Lochner. And so I didn't know how he would take it. He might be like, well, you can't do that. But was very supportive. He was like, I'm actually really interested in the science policy aspects, but I don't have time to do it. So if you can do it, and I can learn from you about it, then you can, but you also have to realize that you have to figure it out. Like, I don't do science policy, so that's up to you. So I was very thankful to be able to have that support, but I also had to, seek out experts in science policy, and I had those experts on my committee. And so that was a part of my personal responsibility as well.
Thank you. The next question is from John Hurley. John's asking, I'm curious, with your perspective as a neuroscientist and biology knowledge between several of you, what's your opinion on the recent progress for psilocybin within both the medical field and recreational field in order to treat several issues and ailments that can impact a significant portion of the public? Do you see this following a similar trend as cannabis in recent years?
I'm happy to go on that. That's something I talk about kind of regularly. So psilocybin, just so everybody's on the same page, is sort of like the active ingredient of psychedelic magic mushrooms. It's sort of in the same class of drugs as LSD or mescaline, similar sorts of pharmacology, similar sorts of effects. And fairly recently, in the past few years, an organization called MAPS has done some clinical trials using psilocybin to treat the depression that can be associated with like end of life, like terminal cancer and these kinds of things. And the results of the clinical trials have been pretty compelling. Oh no, I'm sorry, that was MDMA. But there's a group at the NYU Medical School that has done that. So, I think that the pharmacology of psilocybin is a little bit more volatile, or the subjective effects are a little bit more volatile than cannabis. Not that cannabis is super predictable. But yeah, I mean, I think there has been this taboo, certainly within the neuropharmacology community, for that entire class of drugs. And now we're seeing positive clinical trial results from MDMA, from psilocybin. Obviously, cannabis has had some compelling, evidence for its medical benefits in some cases. So yeah, that taboo is definitely coming down. Like, basically, I've been to SFN, Society for Neuroscience, the biggest neuroscience conference, several years in a row, and every year there's an extra 3 posters devoted to psilocybin or just that family of compounds in general. So, kind of similar, probably not as broadly applicable as cannabis, but yeah, it's an interesting field.
And as a follow-up question, John's asking, how can scientists effectively communicate in the realm of pharmaceuticals in these instances to adequately talk about risks and benefits without stirring panic or dubious opinions?
I think just to add to the previous question and maybe get at that. So I think that studying these particular natural products, right, are useful. And I think that once we understand fully the mechanism of action and how they might influence particular neuropsychiatric disorders, or how they might affect behavior and emotions, we can then more effectively look towards treatments. As a quick aside / example, one of the things that I'm studying is how the brain might communicate with the body to support emotion. Perhaps, speculatively down the line, maybe one of these particular pharmacological agents might actually be used to counteract maybe negative environmental factors during development. And I think that this, the public trust in these particular pharmaceuticals for the particular reasons we use them will come from the clinical trials, and will come from us showing in the clinic that these things don't have effects that are adverse to what we are using them for.
Many thanks to the audience for sending so many questions. These are great discussions. Next question is from Nick Samaras. Nick says, thank you all for speaking with us today. My question is it overwhelming knowing that there are so many platforms for science communication in today's technological era? How do you combat this? And I would add, how do you use it?
Yeah, for me, it totally is. And you know, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you know, I think that the most prudent thing to do is first just get started. Just try something. Who cares? You know, you're not gonna, you know, be on the Tonight Show, you know, next week or something like that. But who cares? You know, you're getting started and learning from your mistakes and learning what you like and you don't like. But I think the most important thing is, you know, pick a platform out of the myriad of platforms that has a medium that you find appealing or you find sort of rewarding to do. Like, you know, for me, you know, I would do like literature reviews, and I would, you know, prepare sort of like, you know, the live stream backdrop and stuff like that. And that took a lot of time. And so, but just because it was so rewarding, it was so much fun to get to like talk to people from all over the world, it didn't feel so much like work. It felt like this is my playtime, you know, even though I was still in the lab, you know. So I think that that's probably the best thing you can do to just, you know, cut through all of the noise to get to the signal of like the platform that would be most compatible with your interests.
I think the platform I use.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think the platform I'm most familiar with is Twitter. There's so much going on in the science Twitterverse. And so even though I mean, I don't have that many followers, I'm not all that popular, but I think it's a great way to get started of just practicing your science communication in a small amount of words and figuring out what all the hashtags are so you can start getting the community engaged in what you're saying. And just follow it, like Ian shared a lot of great, I'm going to follow all the people Ian said, because it's a great way to really start seeing what science communication is like and how you can put your own flavor into it.
Thank you all. Hadi Halim is asking, I'm curious to hear your thoughts as a policy researcher. Do you think science communication is needed to move from no partisanship to bringing perspectives from both end of extreme partisan side, or even the other party that's not the other party, perhaps the sort of the third party candidates, etc.?
Just kind of reiterating what I went into earlier. I don't know if you know, one extreme, both end partisan sides, because, you know, then you really get what we have a lot today in the media now is people specifically watching and believing certain factions of it because, you know, you're kind of giving them what they want to hear. And you really dilute the trustworthiness if you're kind of really sticking to one side. So I think, you know, really, again, sticking to the facts, and then, you know, maybe you incorporate that to further your own argument, but, you know, sticking to the facts, I think, is the most important thing, the facts and the data.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like there is this strange reflex that I guess it's not strange. I guess it is intuitive that you need to be fair to everybody. Everybody, you know, every argument is just as valid as the other. But in science, we know that that's just not the case. You have evidence, it supports a position. That's it. And so if the more convincing the evidence, the more convincing that position is. And just because somebody has a wacky hypothesis, you know, that we can like move things with our mind, and hey, that's their argument, that's their hypothesis. They're representing this contingent of people who truly believe this. And let me tell you, there are people who truly do believe this. Doesn't mean that it's worthy of, you know, serious consideration by certainly policymakers, but also just in general. It's you know, as scientists, at least as, you know, as a scientist, I'm interested in what does the evidence support? Let's talk about that. And then, hey, you know, if you want to make an argument and you have evidence to back it up, things, that those positions can change in the face of new knowledge, new evidence. But I don't think that there's any value. I think it's actually counterproductive to just give somebody a platform to speak, of these wacky concepts just because we don't want to hurt their feelings.
We have only a few minutes left, so maybe we can squeeze in 1 or 2 questions. Sasha Patera is asking, thank you, Evvan, for bringing to the forefront that one's PI can be an expert on all the things that you might want to pursue. But I'm happy that the wisdom of your PI to recognize this, yet remain encouraging to you and for you to go out to find expertise beyond what they could provide. Others on the panel, do you also have mentorship and support from your PIs beyond their exact expertise? And how, where, from whom did you get additional guidance?
Well, so, I was very fortunate with my PI. We got along super, we were extremely compatible, and she's just a total blast and brilliant. And she was just very supportive from the very beginning. Like, I wasn't always interested in science communication at all. And so she would just sort of like, have you heard of this organization? She's a part of all these different, she's a pretty senior scientist, and so she's a part of all these organizations. And, she's, I think just today sent me an email for a job that looks pretty cool. But then, beyond that, like, I feel like I'm like advertising for social media through this, and I do not intend to do that. But one of the fabulous things about specifically Twitter, science Twitter, although I imagine other platforms offer similar opportunities, is that a lot of PIs are on there. Like, science Twitter is like a real thing, and people, get jobs. Like, I know so many people who've gotten their postdocs just through Twitter, or, they heard about this one PI. They end up meeting at a Society for Neuroscience. That happened to me 2 times. And, you really do expand your network, and these people can be resources. I did a panel discussion with a guy named Brad Wojtek over in California. I think he's at Berkeley, UCLA maybe. But anyways, and that was purely because we networked online. So that would be my recommendation. It's probably the lowest barrier to entry is to reach out to these networks on a platform like Twitter, if not Twitter.
Anyone else would like to add final comments? I think we're out of time.
Feel free to reach out if you do join Twitter. Just feel free to reach out _anthropoid, and I'll do my best to get more attention to the stuff you're doing.
Twitter is
also, if you are interested in SPAR, we are having another meeting tomorrow at 5 o'clock that is open to everyone.
Jonathan, can you post in the chat?
I can.
Thank you. And Hunter, you wanted to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to say that my PI is an early career PI. She actually came to Rutgers the same year that I applied and rotated in her lab. And she has been very supportive of my endeavors, and I've been upfront from the beginning of the fact that I am interested in science communication. So I think for any graduate students out there that have these particular interests and want to think about balancing them, I think it's just best to talk about that with your PI. And luckily, my PI is also very adamant and interested about science communication and politics. So.
Great. So it's exactly 5:30, so we're right on time. So I just wanted to thank you all for joining us today again and sharing your perspectives. That was really valuable and lovely to listen to. I want to thank our audience for their questions. And again, I just want to add how lucky and grateful we are at Rutgers to have such a rich variety of opportunities for undergraduate and graduate students, right? So whether they're interested in science communication, media outreach, advocacy, politics, government, right? And that's very much in part thanks to the Science Communication Initiative. So Mary and Nick, thank you so much for having us, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, Nick here, Nick Ponzio. And I want to thank, on behalf of the initiative, all our panelists. They did a fantastic job. And thank Anna for moderating this session. Thank you, everyone who tuned in today. I think it was a great discussion about graduate student perspective and recent graduates, their perspective on science communication. And I invite you to join us again next month, November 17th, for a discussion on teaching science communication, a conversation about knowledge and competencies in science. And again on December, forgot the date, about outreach. We'll get the date out to you. I encourage you to take a look at the Science Communication Initiative's website. That's SciComm, SCICOMM.rutgers.edu to learn more about our events and other activities. So thanks again, and have a good evening.